Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We have a special show for you this week as the Buckeyes head into their third game of the season, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, but I want to get to our special guest today, and that is Ohio State Athletic Director Ross Bjork. Ross, thanks for coming on with us. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Patrick. If it's happy hour, are we supposed to have a cocktail or a cold beer or something?
So that was going to be my first question. Typically, I record this. We do it live on a Thursday or Friday afternoon. So generally, I'll slowly sip on a drink.
Yeah.
We're doing this at 10:30 in the morning. So I was going to ask, for you personally, happy hour drink. What's your go-to choice there?
If it's happy hour, I'm probably going with a old fashioned.
Okay.
Most likely, or if I do, the bourbon is probably just neat, something neat and simple and smooth, and try to and then you got to pace yourself. Of course, we got to be responsible, but we're probably going with some kind of bourbon cocktail for happy hour.
All right. Well, next time we do this, we'll try and coordinate it around some of that.
That sounds good.
All right. Before we get into Ohio State, I want to get kind of because I think you have an interesting perspective. You've talked before about your family connections to Ohio and the Buckeyes, but obviously you come from sort of an outside world. So what was your view on Ohio State, the Ohio State athletic department, all that kind of before anything came up about joining this athletic department as the athletic director?
Yeah, it's probably there's probably two different segments of my life in terms of what the viewpoint is, because I've heard about Ohio State, my whole life growing up with my mom, who's from Northwest Ohio, grew up on the family farm. I've talked about that. I talked about that in my opening press conference, and I had an Uncle Vernon, who's no longer with us. He was a huge sports fan. He was a high school teacher in just south of Bowling Green, and he followed everything. Bowling Green State, Ohio State, even the team up north, he would keep track of them. Maybe he was keeping track of the enemy doing that. But he would always talk about the Buckeyes, and he would always wear this T-shirt that said "Woody's back," and I'm like, "Where's Woody coming from? He's not with us anymore either." And so I just heard about Ohio State through the family side of it, and then my mom's a huge music fan, and so she loves the best damn band in the land. And so I'd hear about Ohio State through that piece of it. And then, being a student, I always prided myself on being a student of college athletics. As a professional, I think it's our obligation to really keep up with our industry. And, Gene Smith just had such a legacy in our business with the way he carried himself, the way he led, not only nationally, but everybody always knew that Ohio State athletics had a great culture, a great vibe, a great environment, facility development, competition, academic success, all the social responsibility pieces around leadership and, teaching and life after sport. And so it was a model program for many of us who follow this to say, boy, if we could only do what Ohio State's doing, boy, if we could only compete like Ohio State is competing. So there was just a lot of knowledge, I think, in the industry of how things operated here at Ohio State. And so when all this came up, it just, with the family piece, the legacy of Gene, the program itself, it really became a no-brainer when everything kind of crystallized around me and this potential opportunity. I just had to kind of knock myself upside the head and say, "You're crazy for not looking at this." Because of all the personal ties, but also just the professional knowledge of what it means to be a Buckeye. So lots of powerful synergy.
Makes sense. I think when you had that time period where Gene was still around, it almost felt like you'd be able to ease into things, right? And then the Ohio State basketball job opens, the men's basketball. You've talked a lot about why you went with Jake Diebler, but just what was that process of? You're still kind of getting integrated into Ohio State, right? And now you're talking to coaches. How did that go sort of behind the scenes? Not so much the hiring process, but just your fit and into everything.
Yeah. If there's a textbook on a transition period, I think the way Ted Carter laid it out, the way Gene was so accommodating, having me overlap for 4 months. I think we wrote a great textbook on how to have maybe a perfect transition, if you will. And we didn't really have a manual to say, oh, if we do it this way, we know it'll work. I think we approached it with a lot of trust, with a lot of communication. There was no sort of, Gene wasn't worried about, oh my God, is this guy going to be breathing down my neck? Because I made sure that I was going to approach it, the right way. I wanted to make sure I was in the background, if you will. But I knew that there were decisions that did have to be made by me because they would have long-term impact, like coaching hires. We hired 4 coaches when I was the advisor. That's probably not in the manual, if you will. But when the basketball thing came up, I remember I talked to Gene when I was getting the job, and I said, "Hey, Gene, is there any sports that are on your radar in terms of maybe potential transitions in the spring?" And there was a few. Sorry, my light keeps going off.
Oh, you're good.
So I don't know if you can
You're
edit this
fine.
or not. Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that, Patrick. But Gene had mentioned he had mentioned a couple sports, and basketball was at the tip of his tongue, and he was just concerned about the energy, the direction, what was happening, the playability, all those kind of things. And so it was on the radar. So I started doing some research in January about the market and what was happening, what the Big Ten market, because it was going to be a new environment for me coming into the Big Ten. And then I got to meet Jake on March the 3rd, and I was just so impressed with his demeanor, his maturity. I thought he was really ahead of the curve in terms of the recruiting aspect in the modern era of college basketball. Then you watch him coach on the sideline. And so, his wherewithal, I talked about wherewithal, I talked about sort of his fortitude, his maturity level. But I think the process allowed me to get to know the place and the people quicker than coming in on July the 1st and having a 100-day plan and getting to know people and doing all the things. I could do that in that 4 month period. I could do that during a coaching search where we didn't have a lot of time for the pleasantries. It's like, okay, we got to get to work. Okay, let's get to know each other through the process while we're working together. So I think it was actually a great way for me to learn the culture even more so,
Mhm.
and learn our processes and procedures in an accelerated time frame, knowing that we also wanted to get it right. Getting it right was more important than speed, and I think we did that. I believe we did that. So impressed with Jake and how he's ran things since. But the process, I think, allowed me to really learn the place and the culture and our processes a lot sooner than if I would have just started on July the 1st and went through this transition period in a normal way, perhaps.
Yeah, I assume that once Gene is no longer there, he walks out the door June 30th. That made it easier for you to settle into that desk, that chair, full time. I'm the guy now.
Yeah, and I was telling somebody the other day that in some ways, I feel like I've been here 3 years, and I'm only as we're recording this, today's day 81, 81 days in the official chair, and really, I think I feel like I've been here 3 years. One, I think I've met a ton of people, and it's been great. There's still people I need to meet. There's still a lot to learn. I haven't figured it out by any means. But because of maybe those decisions that we had to make during the advising period, so the 4 head coaches that we had to hire, all of the things that are happening in college athletics, there's not a lot of time to, hey, let's kumbaya, let's get to know everybody. We had a head coaches meeting the other day. We've had lots of head coaches meetings since I've been here, and we just have work to do. And when there's work to do, the acceleration of the relationships just has to take place. And so, not that we want to rush relationships, because I do think those do take time, but there's decisions that we just have to make, and we have to go fast. And so, a lot of ways, I feel like I have been here longer than those 81 days, but there's just so much happening in our world, and we have to make decisions. And my name's on the office that says athletic director, senior
Right.
vice president. Right, somebody has to make those decisions, and that's me. And I'm in this spot, and we're going to continue to lead through this.
One of the decisions that I know has been brought up to you quite a bit is about Ohio Stadium and kind of the future of the horseshoe. I've talked to, friends of mine that are Buckeye fans that go to games regularly, have their various complaints and whatnot. But what do you see as the future of that place? Because I know you're trying to attract people there with TV and the viewing experience from home. So what in your mind does it look like at Ohio Stadium in the future under your leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating time, and we probably don't have time in the happy hour. We probably need several happy hours to cover this topic. There's just a lot to it. It's a 102-year-old building, right? That was built by the people of Ohio. They fundraised in all 88 counties. It was a fascinating process to really study on how they raised all the money. And so Ohio State athletics is a public trust, but Ohio Stadium is truly, truly a public asset, right? And so, how do we make sure that we have the right kind of deferred maintenance? There are pipes, and there's wires, and there's plumbing, and electricity, and mechanical elements. They're getting to the end of their useful life. So, how do we pay for that? And no one sees that.
Right.
But if that fails, that affects how it operates, right? And then there's things that people see, right? The concourses, the public spaces, the concessions, the seating bowl, the video board. So we have a comprehensive, and this was before I got here, there's a comprehensive sort of roadmap on timing of when do we have to replace the sound system. Right now, the sound system is only in the south scoreboard. When do we have to replace the scoreboard? When do we have to replace certain elements that are, again, ending their useful life? And so it's a comprehensive look. And then what do we do to drive revenue? Let's face it, we're in a new era where we've always had revenue at the forefront, but even more so in this new era of college athletics, revenue is so essential. So things like the 1922 club that we just announced, it's not going to affect the seating bowl. You actually can't access that club from the seating bowl. It's a different experience, but that space was sitting there. It was a vacated office area, classroom area. That's an asset. How do we capitalize on the asset? So I don't ever see doing a comprehensive stadium-wide renovation like they did back in the late 90s. That the expense on that, I think what we have to do is look at it in pieces and parts, in stages, and almost do sort of tactical surgery, if you will, on the building. And so we're going to continue to do that. I think we have a good roadmap, but how do we monetize it? How do we make it for everybody? If we monetize one certain area, can we actually lower prices in other areas, right? Because it all sort of adds up. So we want to be strategic and creative, but also protect what it means to walk in that stadium and have people get goosebumps. That has to continue. What does it mean when somebody walks in that stadium? They may have been a Buckeye fan their whole life, but they can only go to that one game in their life.
Yeah.
And what do they feel when they walk in that stadium? We want that experience, and we want to be able to pay for it. And so balancing those things is going to be part of the vision that we have for Ohio Stadium. So there's a lot to it, Patrick. I tried to answer it as succinctly, but also comprehensively, because it's just going to be an ongoing element. One of the things that we're working on for next year is taking the TV trucks and trying to move those away from our front door, because that's taking up parking.
Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of an eyesore. And so that's a little thing, but I think that's how we have to approach it. People will see a lot of little things happen over time to make it better.
You reference kind of the era that we're in, and revenue. Obviously, revenue sharing is coming to college athletics for the first time. People are still figuring out NIL. What do you think this world looks like as athletes continue to get paid, as this revenue sharing comes in? How do you think college athletics evolves from here in your mind?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. To me, this is a major market correction. We've had different market corrections over time in college athletics. And, the founding of the NCAA was sort of a market correction around health and safety. We had Title IX. That was a market correction on equality and female athletics, right? We had costs of attendance. We've had all these. We had NIL back in 2021. This is a major market correction. So to me, this is not really a new conversation. It's a new conversation in terms of shifting resources to the athletes, which they earn, they deserve, right? The money got so big. in all of this. And so it's high time that we do something. And we're sort of being forced by a court case. We should have been doing this on our own. There was ways to do it. And we really protected amateurism too long. And so, look, here's how I say it. We have higher education in the middle. Education, we're always going to go to class and we're going to play games. And if you had amateur athletics over on this spectrum and professional athletics on this side, are we kind of tilted towards professional athletics where we don't have an employment model, but there's a lot of money in the system and there's going to be money that's shifted to the athletes outside of their scholarship? And so that's really what this is you're going to have a scholarship bucket of resources. You're going to have a revenue share bucket. And then you're still going to have a third-party NIL bucket. How that's defined and how that's operationalized is still yet to be determined in kind of the post-house case settlement. But that's really what we're going to be talking about is a scholarship for some athletes, revenue share and scholarship for some athletes, and then all three, NIL, revenue share, and scholarship for some athletes. And then the way we have to do it here at Ohio State is we have to operate 36 sports.
Right.
And how we allocate those resources is just not going to be the same for each sport. And we're mapping out different models right now on what that could look like. And so we'll have some sports that don't have scholarships. We'll have some sports that only have scholarships. And then we'll have some and NIL opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have some sports that have scholarship and revenue sharing. And so it is a new world. We have to make some difficult decisions that some people may not like and may not agree with, but there's finite resources. There's finite, processes that we have to adhere to. There's roster limits as part of this. So the one thing about the new world that this does give us is it does give us clarity.
Yeah.
Right now, we need some clarity and we need some predictability because we've been chasing all of this and there's not been a lot of predictability, especially the last 5 years. So even though we've been kind of dragged along with the court case,
mm-hmm.
that predictability and clarity is way more important in today's environment. And so that's what we have to adapt to. And there's a lot more. We could come on a podcast in 2 months, and there's probably some things that have shifted and been updated. But this new model is it's needed. It's time. It's a market correction, and we're going to be on the right side of the equation here at Ohio State.
And I can't let you out of here without talking about the football team specifically. You came in at an interesting time, 3 straight losses to Michigan, no Big Ten championship the last 3 years. Obviously, there's been kind of an all-in approach, right? I think I keep quoting Denzel Burke when he said natty or bust in January.
Yeah.
I feel like from your perspective, that's got to be a lot to walk into, but it's Ryan Day that's running the team. You've talked about how you feel like he deserves more credit for what he's done to put this roster together. Just when you look out at this football team, and I know you've been to each of these games, how do you feel like this is all coming together? And just your perspective on the next couple months here as we head through this football season.
Yeah. I've said this. One of the great joys that I've had is getting to know all of our coaches, but especially Coach Day and just his demeanor. Again, his intentionality, his focus, and by not having the play calling duties any longer, it really allows him to be the CEO, head coach that is needed and required in today's modern day world of college football, especially at a place like Ohio State. And so, look, we all get the pressure. We all understand that there is a lot of money in the system, but the money doesn't mean anything unless you have the culture and unless you have the leadership and you have the platform, to have your players be empowered. That's what I love about the maturity of our team is they've been empowered by Coach Day to be leaders. And that speaks to culture and that speaks to environment. Do we have a lot of talent? Sure. Everybody can see that part of it. Is there a lot of resources here at Ohio State? Yeah, we embrace that. We're in a city of 2 million people. There's a lot of companies who want to support our athletes and use them to market their companies. We have to embrace that. We're okay with that. But the other piece to me is way, way more important. And that is the leadership and the culture. So I've been really impressed with that part of it. I've been really impressed with the demeanor of the team. The week after the Akron game, I went to practice and I was like, holy cow, what's going on here? I mean, they were getting after it because they're not going to rest. I was out there yesterday at practice. They're not resting on, okay, hey, we're 2-0 and we got all this attention. No, it's a step by step approach. Coach Day has instilled that piece of it. It is a long season. Anything can happen. There can be lots of fits and starts and all these kind of things that can come up. But to navigate through that is going to take the culture, is going to take the leadership. And so to me, we just got to take it, game by game, week by week. That's the old coaching cliche, but it matters even more. That cliche matters even more because of the long season and the long potential and the depth that you have to navigate now a 12-team playoff. So I'm excited. I just we kind of need to let the air out of this whole like win or bust.
Right.
That's not the approach. We don't wake up thinking that. We wake up thinking about how do we get better today? How do we continue to have the right culture? How does Coach Day instill that fight mentality? That's really the core value of the program. And so I've just been impressed with how he's leading and really the environment around the Woody Hayes complex.
All right, Ross. Well, thank you. I know it's a busy. I imagine it's busy all the time for you, but I appreciate you taking some time to come on the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We'll do this again, maybe with some drinks next time. How about that?
Absolutely. We'll have an old fashioned next time.
All right. I'll see you
Thanks
soon.
a lot,
Thanks
Patrick.
again.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Thank you again to Ross Bjork for coming on. Not a lot of free time, I imagine, for him to do things like this. So the opportunity to get him on and talk to him about his first handful of months as Ohio State athletic director is a good experience for all of us. Let's dive into the Buckeyes now. After talking some more general Ohio State things with the athletic director, let's talk about what we're heading into this week as the Buckeyes get ready for Marshall coming off the off week. We talked last week about the improvement week, right? That Ryan Day had kind of put out as a message. What did that mean? What did the Buckeyes get better at? Some of that will not come to fruition, be apparent until down the road. But I think from all signs point to it was a good week. If you missed it for some reason, the Buckeyes didn't really take the off week off. It was much more of a business-like approach. They kept more or less the same schedule, practicing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the players were able to get the weekend off basically, and the coaches were able to get out recruiting. They were able to watch games on Saturday, which Ryan Day talked about, kind of what that means. And I think there is a interesting learning experience that can happen through that, because you don't get many opportunities if you're an Ohio State coach to do something like that, to just kind of sit back all day and watch football. And what you can take away from that is different than what the average fan may see watching the games on TV, even media people, and trying to look ahead to other games. Coach Day talked about not only looking at schemes and what other teams are doing that way, but also how the demeanor of coaches on the sidelines. That's not something I'm looking at when I'm watching a game, right? When I'm watching Michigan State, for example, to prepare for a couple weeks from now, I'm not looking at what Jonathan Smith is doing demeanor wise unless something happens. But Coach Day, as a coach who knows he is on camera and dealing with the reactions of people and his players and the rest of his staff. Okay, how are different coaches around the country doing things? How are they handling things? Situations. I wrote about this yesterday. The Georgia-Kentucky game and the way that ended with Kentucky punting with, I think it was, just a few minutes left in the game, down 1, and the chance to upset Georgia. Georgia runs the ball down, or runs the clock down to, I think it was 9 seconds when Kentucky got the ball back. And obviously that's been a big talking point this week. Okay. So as I wrote, Ohio State isn't often in the situation where the Buckeyes are trying to, spring this big upset, but they do get in situations, or they will get in situations down the road where you have to decide, okay, is it better to play the field position game here kind of late, let our defense do its thing and get the ball back and perhaps, start a new drive, maybe even in better field position? Or do we be aggressive on fourth? I think in that situation, it was like 4th and 8, 4th and 7, something like that. Do we be aggressive? Do we go for it? You're just inside the other team's half. So now, and these aren't new to Coach Day, obviously. These are situations he's been in before, but now you've thought about it a little bit before you actually get into these situations again. And it's something that now comes up in meetings. And not that it wouldn't normally. This is stuff that gets talked about throughout the year, but it's kind of in the front of people's minds because it happened over the weekend, right? And then I'm sure that's not the only thing, but that was an example brought up in the press conference. And Coach Day said 1,000% that's stuff that they talk about after seeing it. And one of the things I asked about was, can you use moments in other games, especially in a week like this, where not only the coaches, but the players are watching college football, most of them, I imagine. Can you use those moments? You've played 2 games. You've had blowouts in both games. There's been very little, clear teaching moments. Obviously, there are very specific things, but can you use things that happen in other games and say, look, this is something that can happen in our game. This is, pointing these out to players that these situations are coming down the road. And so I think it's a useful ability to be able to watch that. And in a year when you have 2 off weeks, maybe you can do that a little bit more, especially with the way that this off week worked. In terms of on the field, my understanding is that the Buckeyes really got to work, got a lot done. Coach Knowles talked last week. This is a defense that has been as good as any in the country. Statistically, the top scoring defense in the country, allowed the fewest yards per game in the country. But they haven't played an offense that has tested the Buckeyes, right? So how do you get better in an improvement week from a defense that has dominated, only allowed 6 points, just came off a shutout, has 3 turnovers, 2 of which were returned for touchdowns? How do you get better? How do you build on that? And he talked about the things that he sees that maybe the average fan does not, right? Or even, even more than the average fan. The things that he sees that can hurt this team down the road, even though it didn't hurt the Buckeyes against a Western Michigan or an Akron, right? Like, if a guy is just a little bit, it's just that much more athletic than his opponent. So you're able to make up for maybe a lack of fundamentals on a play, or, whatever the case may be, because you're able to still get to the ball carrier or get to the intended receiver without necessarily using the best technique or being where you're supposed to be exactly, things like that. And so that was kind of the focus. Coach Knowles called it fundamentals of a lot of this past week. And offensively, yes, the Buckeyes statistically are really good, but I think it's the same type of thing, right? That you haven't played 2 good defenses. It'd be one thing if one of these two, maybe one side of the ball is significantly better than the other, so you can kind of judge on that. No, yes, Will Howard has looked really good, but Chip Kelly talked about, there were still things to give him: footwork, discerning pre-snap reads so that you're not doing as much post-snap, things like that, again, he can get away with because he is, because the Buckeyes are just better across the board offensively than both their first 2 opponents. And I just use Will Howard as an example. Every player got something from Chip Kelly, things from Chip Kelly to work on or to focus on during the off week. And, as much as I think you'd probably rather have this open week, off week, whatever you want to call it, after probably week 4, just in terms of spacing things out. I do think it's good that you have film and you can really, if you're the Buckeyes, dive into the little things early on. And now you have another game where, again, those little things aren't going to matter. And we'll get to Marshall here in just a minute. But they may not matter in terms of the score or how the play results, but you'll be able to look on film from Akron and Western Michigan to Marshall. Okay, these are the things we looked at. Okay, now Did you improve? Did you get better? Even if it wasn't an impact on the play, were you doing the things that we discussed, that we worked on, those type of things? So I think that timing wise, was a great approach. I think the Buckeyes, from all accounts of things that I've heard, did a good job of managing that week and using it to actually get better, and not just kind of a wasted week of going out and doing the motions and whatnot. So we're going to see. Again, I don't think you'll be able to see it in terms of the score with Marshall. Excuse me. I imagine it will take place, or we'll run the game will occur similar to these first two. I think the final score will be similar to the first two, but I do think that there will be teaching tools that come out from this and make the Buckeyes better as you go through the season, because of the way they handled it. So as we look ahead to Marshall, last non-conference game, right? So this is your, in theory, kind of last chance to clean up a lot of those mistakes. Again, regardless of how big or small they are, I think it's important to carry that momentum through into this game. This is a Marshall team that's 1-1. They defeated Stony Brook in week 1 at home, 45-3, and then lost to Virginia Tech 31-14 on the road 2 weeks ago. Marshall was also off this past week. So this is not a game that should be in question for very long. It's not a game that should challenge, though I do think it will probably be a bit of a step up from what Ohio State saw in the first 2 games. Denzel Burke was talking this week about being challenged a bit more. The first 2 games, Ohio State's opponents haven't really tested these cornerbacks. A lot of it is because the games have gotten out of hand, and it's just kind of seeing things out late in the game. Akron obviously lost one of their 2 quarterbacks that they were going to use in the game. But I think Marshall will test Ohio State's corners successfully. That's up for debate, but Stone Earl, the quarterback, he's already thrown for 228 yards, has 3 touchdowns and an interception. He's under 50% completion percentage, so you don't like to see that if you're a Marshall fan, but an experienced guy who's played in a lot of games. First year at Marshall, but it will be a better test, I think, for the secondary to see what happens when a team does come at you a little bit, because you're going to see that down the road for sure. And you want to see these guys tested. You want to see them make plays, right? And that's in all facets of the game. With the way this schedule is, yes, you get to kind of slowly roll everything out and kind of get into the season that way. But you also want to, see what it looks like when, a team is going to be aggressive against you or try some different things and how you respond and whatnot. So, like I said, I don't think Marshall will be too big of a thorn in the Buckeyes side. But I do think it's a step up. So what do you want to see out of this game? What makes you feel good going from, the non-conference into Big Ten play next week, going on the road against Michigan State? I think I'd like to see more of the same from Will Howard. I think his steady improvements need to continue, and I don't have any reason to doubt that they will. But I think that will be key to walk out of that game thinking, all right, you don't want to have any doubt about Will Howard, I guess. And I think through the first 2 games, you shouldn't. He's been throwing the ball on target. He's making good decisions. Again, things to clean up, sure. But I think you're through 2 games of the Will Howard era at Ohio State, you're in a really good spot. You like what you see. I would like to see more involvement of Ohio State's other receivers. I think at some point a team is going to say, hey, we're not going to let Jeremiah Smith beat us, right? And right now, Jeremiah Smith has 11 catches for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns. People are going to start trying to take him away. Okay, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, step on up. This may not be the game, and obviously, if you're Will Howard, you're going to take what the defense is giving you. And for whatever reason, that's been Jeremiah Smith more often than not. And some of that has to do with scheme and things like that. But I want to see Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate. It'd be great to have one of them be the receiver you're talking about coming out of this game. And that doesn't mean Jeremiah Smith gets ignored, or you want him to have a good game too. Obviously, you'd love to keep him to keep up this record pace for a freshman, but just getting these other receivers a bit more involved. And Emeka Egbuka has 9 catches, Carnell Tate has 7, so it's not like it's far off. But I would like to see one of those guys potentially have a big day, so you're ready when defenses either try and take away Jeremiah Smith, or maybe Carnell Tate goes out and plays a really good game. Now Michigan State's like, well, maybe we if we're gonna shift coverage or cloud coverage to one side, maybe we are going towards Carnell Tate some as much as we are Jeremiah Smith, or things like that. I just think that would be good for Ohio State down the road to have one of those other guys, or maybe both, coming off a big game. The running game, I think it's obvious. You want to see more of what you saw against Western Michigan and later against Akron to some degree too. Quinshon Judkins, the big plays. I'd like to see Travion Henderson break one. He's had some really good runs, but the main thing I think is that offensive line. You're going to get Donovan Jackson back. Can you do what you did to Western Michigan from the start, early in that game, establish that run? Okay, now you're building on momentum, right? You took what you saw in the Akron game, you cleaned some things up, you went out against Western Michigan and were the dominant offensive line that you should be against a MAC opponent. Okay, now let's do it again against another non-conference foe. Okay, then you can carry that into Michigan State and say, we're on the road. Let's establish the run. Let's dominate that way in a Big Ten game. Doing it, if it goes back and looks more like it did early against Akron, I'm going to be concerned about what this run game and this offensive line, specifically in the run game, is going to look like in Big Ten play. Especially, you got Iowa in a couple weeks. That's a really good defense. It's going to challenge this team, and you need that offensive line playing about as well as they can. Defensively, it's more of the same, right? Yes, we talked about those things that Jim Knowles wants to clean up. Obviously, you want to see progress made in any of those areas that were pointed to during the off week. But it's going to be about continuing to be arguably the best defense in the country. And how do you continue to build week in and week out? Cody Simon talked after the Western Michigan game, coming off of a shutout, that they didn't get any turnovers in that game. Okay. Maybe that's nitpicking a little bit. You shut out an opponent. But that's what the Buckeyes have to do, right? And turnovers have been a big thing. Can you turn over Marshall, 2-3 times in this game, like you did against Akron? And I think the keeping a team out of the red zone thus far. Ohio State, the furthest an opponent has gotten is the 25-yard line. Ohio State's 25-yard line. I believe that resulted in it was a field goal attempt. I think it might have been a missed field goal. Maybe it was a made field goal. I'd have to go back and look. But I know that's as far as the team's gotten. So can you keep Marshall from reaching the red zone for the first time? Can you keep a third straight team from getting into the end zone? These are things, benchmarks that you can have from a statistical standpoint that keep the progress, right? The turnovers, stopping these teams from even getting in scoring distance. You did, against Western Michigan, yes, you got the shutout, but some of that had to do with an early missed field goal. Okay, can you keep a team from even attempting a field goal because they don't get close enough? Again, I feel really good about this defense heading into Big Ten play. But I think this defense needs to continue to challenge itself to be better every week. And that means pushing the envelope a little bit, whatever it may be. Can you take that next step? Can you, deny the offense that much further? And against a Marshall team, like I said earlier, I think they're going to throw the ball a little bit more than what we've seen. Can you turn some of those into interceptions? Can we see a clean game without some penalties? I know there's been some penalties in the secondary, linebackers, things like that. can you play a clean game that way? It's going to be those little things that are going to make the difference down the road. And I think that is the challenge for a defense that's played as good, if not better, than anyone in the country thus far. And then special teams. I think week 1, you saw the aggression on punt return from Brandon Inniss. We didn't see that in week 2. I want to take that back. We didn't see the results as much in week 2 as we did in week 1. In the opener, Brandon Inniss returned, pulling it up here. Brandon Inniss returned 4 punts for 60 yards, one of which he almost broke for a touchdown. That is continuing to be a talking point, is getting a specialty, a return touchdown. Against Western Michigan, he had 4 returns for 6 yards. Now, some of that was situational. Western Michigan did a good job of getting guys down the field and making it so a lot of those were either fair caught, or a lot of the punts were either fair caught, or he just didn't have room to return. But you want to see that aggression continue from Brandon Inniss when he gets the opportunity. Also, will he be the kick returner? Ryan Day said on Wednesday night that the Buckeyes are still kind of working through that. They practiced with both Jaden Ballard, who's done it the first few games and still kind of been lackluster in that department, and Brandon Inniss doing some kick returns. So they hadn't decided as of Wednesday night who would be the starting kick returner, so to speak. But Ryan Day did say that Brandon Inniss could do both things. I think it would be interesting, to see what he could do with as aggressive as he's been on punt return. Obviously, if the ball's kicked out of the end zone or you need to down it in the end zone, fine. But I would like to see that. Can Brandon Inniss just become your return guy this season? And if that's the case, so be it. I know you want to get Jaden Ballard involved. He's a guy who's been in the program for multiple years now. Probably not going to have a huge role in offense. Does a lot of, has worked well in this program. So this is a nice role for him to have. But if he's not going to seize it, and Brandon Inniss is, you said you wanted to maximize special teams, right? So this would be an opportunity to do that. In terms of kicking, punting, I think everything's been good there, though Ryan Day did say that, the punting job is still kind of a fluid thing. Joe McGuire's been the guy, but Nick McLarty did punt against Western Michigan. It was not a good punt, 1 for 35. Joe McGuire averaged 44.7 yards and put one inside the 20 for reference against Western Michigan. So, we won't talk about punters or kickers until something goes wrong, right? And so far, so good for Ohio State. But you want to continue to see that. You want to see the execution on those situations. Does Joe McGuire get things off cleanly, assuming he continues to be the punter? If Ohio State does have to take a field goal at some point in time, does that come off clean for Jaden Fielding? So again, it's going to be about the little things against Marshall. And that brings me to the final thing here on this Bucknuts Happy Hour is what you'll be reading on Sunday. Headline for Sunday. Actually, it'll probably be Saturday afternoon since we'll get a noon game finally for one of these non-conference games. But I think it will, read similar to what you've had in the first 2 games. Buckeyes close out non-conference with confident, insert whatever word you want there, confident, controlling, dominant, whatever, win against the Thundering Herd. I don't see this game being close. I think the Buckeyes saw in the opening game, okay, if we don't get out to a good start, or what happens when you don't get out to a good start. And then they saw in the second game what it takes to get out to that fast start, both offensively and defensively. And, now you kind of have that in your back pocket. The one thing that may be not concerns, but, could be an issue in terms of how quick a team starts is coming off that off week. I do, sometimes you come off that weekend where you didn't play, you're still trying to get back in that routine, especially early in the season. Does it lead to a bit of a slower start? I don't think so. I think they recognize what they need to do to get that fast start. And I think that is how it'll happen. Fast and continuous throughout the game on Saturday afternoon. All right, we're going to wrap up. I apologize that this wasn't a live version of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We did things a little differently to accommodate Ross Bjork's schedule, which anytime he's able to come on the show, we will do. There's no intent to not do that live in the future. It was just kind of how it works out and how we do the live stuff versus recording. So in the future, hopefully we'll be able to schedule it where we can do it live and have people in the comment section talking, asking questions of Ohio State's athletic director. But I want to thank everyone for listening to this, watching this, and thanks Ross Bjork for coming on. Thanks to Ohio State for allowing that to happen. I hope to have him on more often. I really like his insight on things, and he does seem to be pretty friendly in terms of giving his time for things like this. So thanks again to Ross for doing that. Thank you all. I don't have a drink to cheers for this one, but cheers nonetheless. Enjoy the game, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk next week as the Buckeyes head into Big Ten play on the road against Michigan State. Should be a confident 3-0 team, top 5 team in the country in doing so. Cheers, Buckeye fans.